Hi everyone. In this lecture, we're going to explore many important concepts related to children and death. How common is it? What are normal responses or emotions? How does developmental stage or age impact how a child views, understands, and copes with death? What types of losses are children more likely to experience? These are a few of the things we'll look at in lecture today. I know this can be a tough topic, but when we consider the long-term positive impact of learning how to handle death and loss, we're able to support children and help them develop into healthy adults. This then decreases the risk factors of grieving children and teens who are not getting the support we need. This lecture will hopefully provide some foundation of understanding related to this topic, as well as practical suggestions we can use in healthcare or in our own personal lives. This is what we're talking about. The top pictures here are what we hope for children. We hope to see them happy and laughing and playing and having fun. So talking about death and dying with children can be very difficult for many adults. The shield we see in the middle is a symbol of how we want to protect them from feeling sad or scared, as we see in those bottom pictures here on the slide. But as we consider life and living fully, we have to accept that children will be impacted by death, dying, loss, and grief. And as Joy Johnson explains in the book, Keys to Helping Children Deal with Death and Grief, we can best protect them by preparing them, by helping provide them the tools they need to navigate a life that will have moments of grief and loss. First off, let's acknowledge that all children experience loss in some form or another. The age and intensity of it occurring may differ, but they all experience loss. We've talked previously about how we all experience different kinds of changes or losses over the course of our lifespan, and these may be shared experiences or they may be unique to us and our own family dynamics. When you did your own loss timeline activity recently, you may have listed some of these changes and losses for yourself. It's important that we recognize that oftentimes children experience these types of losses before they experience a death, or they might even be related to the death itself. Helping children develop effective coping skills will be so valuable, and they can use those coping skills to deal with all types of different losses, including the death, and this will carry on into their teen and adult years as well. Children are also socialized about death and loss. They're taught how to react, what behaviors are acceptable, what to say, who they can or can't talk to. These might not be actual conversations they have, but based rather on observations they're making of their family and the world around them. Remember, their family is the primary unit of socialization, then their school and peers. Media and religion also impact what a child knows and understands about death and loss. So we want those who they are loved by to be the most and best source of good information and know that they can ask questions as needed. We know that there are many influencing factors. We touched upon some of these earlier in the semester when we talked about determinants of the grief experience. This plays true for children and teens as well, and how they cope with a current loss has a lot to do with what they've already experienced and what's already influenced their perceptions and behaviors. It's important for us to know that children don't naturally fear death. Rather, culture socializes children with what they should believe and feel about death. Children's understanding of death grows as their experience feeds them information and as they progress developmentally. Children experience as much or more pain from watching their closest loved ones grieve as they do from the actual event. Take the grandparents, for example. If a grandparent dies and they see their parent openly grieving, that could be very new for them, maybe even scary for them. Their experiences surrounding death can leave a death imprint or a strong memory and emotions tied to that event. That initial experience then influences how they deal with death and loss in the future. Supporting and empowering bereaved children gives them permission to grieve, and it helps equip them with the tools that they'll need not just currently, but for the rest of their lives. So just how commonly is death experienced by children? How many kids really have to deal with a significant death during their formative years? Well, research shows that by age 10, 1 in 7 children will experience the death of a loved one. That's a pretty big number if you think about it. Considering that many of those children also have siblings, cousins, or other young peers, we realize that there are many grieving children in our communities. Bringing it back to a smaller level, if you look at the 7 kiddos on the screen in front of you, if you had to pick one of them to experience a serious death at this age, which one would you pick? Well, that's impossible, right? Or at least unfair. Of course I'm not going to ask you to choose. But that illustrates a really valuable point. We're uncomfortable being asked to think about grieving children. Sad kids aren't exactly something that makes people excited and want to have spread. Instead, we want to shelter them, to protect them. By learning how to explain death and grief to kids, we can help to prepare them. And that's a far better gift than just pretending that loss and death don't exist. To look at another powerful statistic, let's consider teenagers. By age 15, which is usually about a sophomore in high school, 1 out of 20 will have experienced the death of one or both parents. So it's hard enough that they may have lost some type of family member, maybe a grandparent is a first experience, but for many adolescents, they're also facing the death of a parent, the person who, for most kids, is their primary caregiver. Consider adolescence in itself. It's already hard enough with physical and hormonal changes, then add conflicts with friends, growing independence from the family unit, and then add the death of a parent. It's no wonder that even teens with the best support systems struggle to cope, and we all know that many teens don't have the support they need in the first place. This becomes critical and life-changing. In fact, if children and teens don't get the support they need, it can lead to unresolved grief. This can then develop into deeper problems, which manifest in many ways, including the list we see here on this slide. It makes sense that if there's been a significant death and kids don't have someone to talk to or someone to trust, they may start to struggle in school. Maybe they can't pay attention. Maybe math and spelling just don't seem as important anymore. Maybe no one else gets it and they're treated like an outsider or a weirdo. Sleep can also become a problem, either with kids sleeping too much or not being able to fall asleep or stay asleep. This can certainly contribute to those behavior problems, which in most cases are really just an outlet for the pent-up emotions inside that don't have any way out. Behavior problems can take all kinds of forms. Some kids pick fights or mouth off. Others get clingy and have boundary issues because they're afraid that everyone else will die and leave them too. Some have angry outbursts that seem to come out of nowhere. Regardless, these behaviors may at first be a normal reaction to grief, but they can progress into more serious problems if they're not addressed and the child isn't supported. Physical illness is also common. Have you or any of your friends ever experienced a death and then you start to suffer from things like migraines, an upset stomach, maybe ulcers, or just seem to have a lowered immune system and get sick a lot? These things can get worse and worse because they can be caused by emotional, mental, and spiritual pain that end up resulting in physical health problems. This is referred to as somatization. With adolescents, it's also common to see higher rates of teen pregnancy, either boys becoming teen fathers or girls becoming teen mothers. After significant death, that youth wants to feel loved. They want to feel heard and understood by someone. Sometimes this can lead to intimacy in relationships that may not have otherwise occurred. Sometimes it's two teens that feel they're the only ones who understand. Sometimes it's someone who takes advantage of that grieving friend or classmate. It can be a lot of things, but we do tend to see an increase in teen pregnancies, so it's something we should be aware of. Illegal behavior can also develop with some grieving children and teens. They might be really angry and resentful after the loss, or they may feel abandoned and then show disregard for authority or rules. They may be looking to cope using alcohol or drugs or tobacco. Sometimes they feel invincible, or they feel numb, and so they might engage in more risk-taking behaviors like speeding, street racing, stealing, or so forth. Sometimes they're doing these things to reach out for help, and sometimes they just don't care anymore. They become so overwhelmed or so depressed that they may honestly feel like no one cares, like no one understands or nothing matters anymore. Certainly, however, these issues listed here aren't all experienced by every teen. Some can be pretty big red flags, though, which we'll talk about more later, and they're important to be aware of. Just as it's important for us to realize that not every child or teen experiences such dramatic behavior changes, it's also important for us to remember that grief is not a mental illness. It doesn't mean they're crazy or that there's something wrong with them. Instead, grief is a part of life, a natural part of life. In fact, as Earl Groman noted, of all the creatures, human beings are the only ones able to understand that they cannot live forever. An essential part of our humanity is that we find meanings for death as well as for life. This is so true. Our ability to do this really hinges upon the support and resources we have available to us, as well as on our own natural resiliency. It's also critical in defining the rest of our lives and our ability to move forward and invest our energy in new tasks, hobbies, and relationships. We'll look at adults in another lecture, but at this point, it's just important that we realize that children, teens, and adults all grieve differently. They understand concepts differently, they cope differently, and they process and adjust to the loss in different ways. I mean, it makes sense, right? Especially when we consider that children and teens are still maturing in many ways. They're maturing physically, mentally, emotionally, as well as socially. There's already a lot going on, and then adding a death to the mix certainly doesn't make life any easier. Thus, early intervention is so important. If someone, even just one person, can reach out to a grieving child or teen and let them know they care, it can really make a world of difference. Youth can learn that it's okay to have different feelings and how to express their emotions in safe and socially acceptable ways. They can learn healthy coping mechanisms, and hopefully they can learn how to utilize the support of their family and friends. If kids don't have these things, then that's when they might struggle even more. Accessing other resources like teachers, school counselors, social workers, doctors, therapists, even just good friends, family, and neighbors, children and teens can learn how to cope with not only this death, but also with future grief experiences and other life challenges. To get us thinking about what grief can be like from a child's perspective, let's watch this short video clip entitled, "What About Me?" Now, I'll warn you, this is an older video, so you'll notice sometimes their quality isn't the best, or certainly their clothing and accessories indicate this was filmed back in the 80s or 90s, but the experiences are still the same. The feelings and emotions are still relevant. I like it because it's from the mouths of children and teens, so let's sit back and learn from them.
Sometimes I feel jealous because when Peter gets a lot of cards or toys or anything like that, sometimes I get angry because a lot of the treatment make my brother do stupid things or just things that all little brothers do to get you mad.
Sometimes I get afraid because the same thing might happen to one of my family members, like it happened to my brother Stefano.
Dad can't walk on nothing.
Why not?
Because he's dead.
What happened to him?
He drowned. sometimes I just feel like pushing it away and like erasing it out of my brain.
Sometimes I feel guilty because sometimes I get a little silly and I think I'm the reason that she died.
Sometimes I feel lonely when I'm walking to school because we would walk to school together.
Sometimes when I pray, I ask God to take care of my father and make sure he's all right.
When somebody dies, that you care about, you really get sad.
It feels like I'm never going to get over it, but now I'm starting to get over it, and now I understand that I will get over it.
Jeffrey died from sudden infant death syndrome. SIDS is a short word for sudden infant death syndrome. My mother put him to sleep, and when she was going to wake him up, he wasn't breathing. So she called 911. And that's the last thing I knew. By the time I got home, the driveway was filled with cars. Fire trucks, ambulance, police, everything.
Stefano was my brother, and he was 12 years old when he died. I was only 10. I'm 2 years younger than he is. And he died of leukemia.
When he left the earth, my dad hung himself.
He died?
Darnell was my first brother, and my only, so I guess it was hard losing a brother.
David's my younger brother, and he's got brain cancer, and he's had it for 3 years in November.
When he was at the hospital, it was like at night, and when I had woke up, my grandmother had told me that he had passed, and I had just cried and cried.
Well, Peter is my brother, and he had a brain tumor, and the doctor got it out, and now he's just on the drug called chemotherapy to get rid of it.
I know what happened to Petey. When he had a brain tumor.
It's very hard for me now that she's gone. I'm not sure, but she was born with a lot of problems. She was born with spina bifida. And she was sick a lot of times.
Was Doug sick? Or did he go on a trip? Or what happened to Doug?
He went to a field trip.
And what happened? No.
I know that he went up to camp and that he did some archery, and then they played volleyball, and then they went into the water to cool off.
He drowned it. He forgot to eat before he went in the water. That's how he drowned it.
So what did you think? I know the video cut off there at the end and we couldn't see the last little bit, but we were able to see the majority of it, and so I'm curious, what stood out to you? Did anything surprise you or bring up something that you hadn't really thought about before? I think it's pretty powerful to see those kids and see how some really struggled to talk about it, how others may have been more nonchalant, how a couple acted like it was easy, but then you could see, physically looking at them with their nonverbals that they really were struggling. As we try to think about death and loss from a child's perspective, It's clear that emotions can run the gamut. It's important for us to remember that with any and all feelings, they don't have to make sense. Feelings don't have to be linear or logical. They certainly don't have to be rational. Feelings are what they are, and they're very real to the person experiencing them. When working with kids, we never want to argue with them or convince them that they can't or shouldn't feel the way they feel. Instead, we need to listen, stop judging, and offer our support. Here we see the most common reactions that children experience: fear and abandonment, guilt, anger, confusion. Let's talk about these for a minute. Why might a child feel afraid? Maybe the way the person died was scary or violent or traumatic. Maybe they're afraid that everyone else they love is going to die too. Maybe they're afraid of the changes that are happening now that the person is gone. Maybe they're scared of what the future holds. Quite often, we see kids becoming much more clingy and having separation anxiety after a death. That's because they're confused and overwhelmed, and they're worried that something bad is going to happen to someone else, so they want to keep that caregiver or family member in their eyesight at all times. Ultimately, there are lots of reasons they might be afraid after a death, even if they don't seem to make sense to adults. Guilt, that's another big emotion. Kids tend to think it was their fault. Of course, we know that it wasn't, but they don't know that. I've worked with little kids who thought their dad died because they didn't eat their broccoli at dinner, or because they'd gotten into an argument earlier that day, or because their parent was on the way to pick them up from soccer practice, so then they think if they never played soccer to start with, that parent would still be alive. It's important that we listen to kids, but also that we reassure them that it really wasn't their fault. That accidents happen or bad things happen to good people, and it doesn't mean that they did anything to cause it. Now let's look at anger. Anger is one of the most common emotions that all people experience, and yet we live in a society that doesn't feel comfortable with people showing their anger or frustration. So we hold it all inside until it builds up and then often bursts out, maybe in some type of hurtful or socially unacceptable way. We want to let kids know that anger is normal and anger is okay. It's just important that we learn ways to express our anger that don't get us in trouble or don't hurt other people. Talking about specific things like maybe screaming into a pillow, getting exercise, counting to 10, or even deep breathing can be really helpful. And then we have to practice that with the kids so they learn how to do it. Also remember that they're going to mimic what they see at home, and we all know that many adults don't process their anger well as it is, so kids are watching that, and they're going to do the same as what they see at home, for better or for worse. Finally, confusion is obvious. Death and all it brings can be overwhelming and hard to understand. We'll talk in a little bit with more detail, but we need to understand that kids don't understand death the same way adults do. The younger the child, the more confusing and hard to grasp death is. So we have to explain things and word things in a way that's appropriate for their age and developmental level. We never want to lie to children, but they don't need every gory detail either. When we come back, we'll start to explore just what is most helpful for grieving children and how we can modify our approach to help them at their own unique age and developmental stage.